Welcome to episode number 2 of the Simplicity Zen podcast, where today we'll be talking with Soto Zen priest Kokyo Henkel. Kokyo was ordained as a Zen priest in 1994 by Tenshin Anderson Roshi and received Dharma Transmission from him in 2010. Kokyo was a teacher at Santa Cruz Zen Center for a decade and now lives in Colorado, where he practices with Dzogchen teacher Tsoknyi Rinpoche. Did I pronounce that right, Kokyo?
Yes.
Yeah, great, thanks.
He's actually not, he's actually in Nepal, but I'm on his retreat.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So to get started, could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, maybe a little bit about your childhood?
I grew up in Darien, Connecticut,
Okay.
a suburb of New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad commuted into the city on the train every day. And I was a quiet, shy kid.
Mm-hmm.
And one memory I have from those early years in elementary school, I don't know, it's maybe 8 or something, is during the recess, the playtime in school, and the kids would all go out and let out steam and run around and play tag. And often I would go out to the edges of the big playground field where there was a row of trees along the edge and just kind of sit under the trees there by myself, which I just enjoyed and didn't think much of it. And one time I remember, because it was maybe sort of a habit, one of the teachers came up to me after recess and said, "Are you okay? I see you off alone under the trees there." And I was surprised to hear that she thought that might be a problem because I was just enjoying myself. I think I always liked to be quiet and spend time alone, even as a young kid.
A little foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Did you have siblings? Did you grow up in a big family, or were you an only kid? Or
I have one brother who's 3 years younger.
Yeah. And was this like a middle class? You said like suburbs. So was this kind of a middle class upbringing?
Yes, yeah, upper middle class, very conservative, somewhat wealthy town, and so by the time I graduated from high school, I was very ready to leave that town and not spend my life there.
Yeah. Did was it a religious family? Did you grow up going to church or talking about religion or anything like that with your family?
No, not really. It was more like going to church was kind of a social thing, like Episcopal church. And so when my brother and I were the age to kind of go to Sunday school, I think my parents felt like it would be a good social thing for us to have that church experience. I don't think they would necessarily have gone without the kids. And at some point going to church there, I started feeling some connection to just being there. And it's so long ago, it's hard to remember, but I do remember that I was into it for some reason, just sitting in that kind of dark room with the stained glass windows and listening to this organ music. And at some point I started, maybe after Sunday school ended or something, I would ask my parents, "Can we go to church?" Which I think a little bit unusual for a kid. And they're like, "Well, okay."
Something resonated with you.
Something resonated. It's really hard to say what it was, just some feeling about it.
And was that all the way through your childhood and teenage years, or mostly as a child?
I did a confirmation in the Episcopal Church as a teenager, probably 14 or something. And I don't remember, we had to take classes and learn doctrine and all, and I don't really remember much of it, but I do remember one event with the minister who kind of after we'd been to all the classes and just before the confirmation ceremony, he met with each person, each kid individually So it's kind of like a dokusan. And I remember him asking, so why are you doing this, this confirmation? It was a great question for me because I was just sort of following along, going through the motions. I think my parents set me up doing it. I didn't mind, but when he asked, why are you doing this? As a naive kid, maybe thinking it was sort of like a koan interview and I should, what's the right answer? So I thought the right answer would be, I'm doing it for God. And the minister said, no, don't do it for God, you do it for yourself.
That's great.
So it was a kind of a turning word there about religion and spirituality as a kid. It's funny that that's the only thing I remember from that time is that conversation. It kind of turned it back at me and like, no, this is something like personal. It's not just something where you go through the motions.
So did you go to public high school, like have a fairly typical high school experience?
Yeah, public high school. My thing growing up was sailing, sailboat racing, like obsessed with it, like for years and years in high school, and going to becoming really devoted to practicing in that realm and all his spare time.
Just like a little personal sailboat, or like you're part
usually,
of a crew?
Mostly always there's two persons, so with another kid. Fast small boats like with trapeze, where one person hangs off the wire. I was usually the skipper steering with boats that would plane, that would kind of like rise up out of the water when the wind is strong. So it was exciting, and started going to national regattas and got close to get to like trying out for Olympics. I was like pretty into it. And then when I got to college, partly I got into college because of the sailing team
like
coach.
A sponsorship kind of?
A little bit. Just he helped me to get in, I think. But then when I got there after the first year, my value in my life was changing so much. That would be the next chapter where Zen comes in. Yeah. And the whole like aspect of competitiveness in the sailing world. I got disillusioned by that part. Like you kind of ruthlessly do anything to try to come out ahead of your friends who are these competitors, and somehow the whole thing not making sense to me. I mean, I still love sailing, but the ruthless competitive nature, I sort of just dropped it after the first year of college and never really picked it up again.
So as a child or a teenager, did you have any contact with Eastern spirituality, or was Eastern culture resonant with you at all? Was there any sort of kind of like
Well, not at all with my parents. They didn't know anything about that. They were quite conservative. But sometime in high school, I think it was a sailing friend who was kind of into exploring the first beginnings of these types of things. We were friends and would talk about this stuff. At one point, he gave me, loaned me his copy of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So that was in high school. Yeah, and I had never heard of Zen, actually, I don't think, or Buddhism, really. I mean, maybe I'd heard of it, but he said, this is pretty interesting, check this out. And I remember reading it and feeling, actually really don't know what he's talking about here. This is a very strange book, but still some resonance, some feelings, some connection with that book. And then I think also in high school, maybe after that book, then I went to the public library, and maybe I had to find that book to finish it because I had to give it back to him. And I was getting into like the music of the 60s. And in high school, I started to discover like the Grateful Dead. And I think through that, maybe I heard about somehow, I don't remember how, I heard about Aldous Huxley. It was in the 50s. I think an English, British philosopher and writer, and exploring somewhat, dabbling in Eastern traditions, but also psychedelics.
Was he not? Maybe I'm wrong. I thought it was like 1890s or so. Is that not right?
I think he was more like maybe 40s, maybe
Oh, okay.
30s or 40s, but 1900s, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. But predating the beats one way or another.
Yeah, predating the beats.
Mhm.
But he might have known D.T. Suzuki. He did know some,
Oh, okay.
he would quote Zen koans and things like
Hmm.
this, superficially. He wasn't a practitioner,
Hmm.
but he was into mysticism
Hmm.
and
Doors of
awakening.
perception.
And yeah, The Doors of Perception is his classic one. So I read that in high school. And yet maybe after that, I found another one called Moksha, which
Hmm.
is the Sanskrit word for liberation.
Hmm.
Not so much a Buddhist term, more it's used in Buddhism occasionally, but more of a other Indian
Hmm.
spirituality. And he made a connection between his experiences with mescaline and psilocybin
Hmm.
to Eastern moksha. And that was fascinating to me. I remember as a high school kid staying up late, read in my bed, reading this long book and thinking, wow, there's these types of experiences are actually possible.
Hmm.
And so that was kind of a premonition of things to come. I
You
didn't know anybody who practiced meditation.
had you
Or
tried psychedelics yourself at this point?
not in high school,
Hmm.
um, just cannabis. At
Hmm.
some point, maybe near the end of high school, I was kind of conservative and naive kid. So
Hmm.
it wasn't until the end of high school that I had some access to that. And I think on discovering that, I thought there's something interesting here.
Hmm.
But that was
So,
it.
so growing up as a kid or a teenager, did you have any like great doubt or just, did you have any like kind of existential angst, or was there any, or was it just kind of a mellow childhood without any great drama, or was there like a little bit of kind of great doubt, questioning going on?
Well, I wouldn't say there was much drama. I feel very blessed to have grown up with very kind, loving, supportive parents and family and friends and, usual teenage angst. But, um, but actually, I would say a very happy and peaceful
Hmm.
childhood and very supported in anything that I wanted to do by my parents. And so, but given that, I think um, I wouldn't say great doubt, but just questioning. Partly because it was a very conservative um, town, and most of people my age weren't really questioning things. I could see they were on the same track as their parents, and we're just going to keep doing the same thing. But
Hmm.
another book that was very influential in high school or junior school was Thoreau's Walden.
Okay.
And I read that, I really felt, uh, wow, this is somebody who is a kind of an intellectual in his social group, but really tried something different and went off and lived in the woods alone. And he also somewhat into Eastern spirituality
Hmm.
and
Yeah, very much so.
really experimenting with simplicity. His simplicity experiment
Hmm.
really impressed me.
Hmm.
And I think the teachers were trying to get us kids to think a little bit outside the box. So
Hmm.
people read it and were like, that's interesting. But for me, it kind of stuck with me. And
What
after
university
reading
was
it,
this?
this was in like junior high school.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah,
fascinating.
kind of younger.
Hmm.
And my friends, I would say, oh, maybe we should try living like Thoreau. And people just thought I was crazy and I'd get over it. So that raised some doubt, I think, about
Hmm.
the mode of life in this little suburban town and how there may be alternatives to this.
So what was it in college that you would say precipitated the switch from competitive sailing to maybe more of an introspective questioning, um, alternative view of
Yeah,
life?
I mean, it was wonderful to leave this little town and,
Hmm.
and that perspective and go to a university. It was in Rhode
Hmm.
Island, so not far from home, but people from all over the country and world with different perspectives.
Hmm.
And so, um,
And what
like
university
I
was this?
said, What's that?
Where did you go?
It was at Brown University
Okay.
in Providence, Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, I was starting to get into it sort of superficially as a sort of ideal or exploration as a high schooler, the kind of hippie movement. Of course, this was like the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
So the main thing had passed, but I think it was like kind of like Thoreau. I saw this movement that I had missed by a decade or two.
Mm-hmm.
And I just idealized it in high school. And then in college, then I met people who were actual hippies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I soon fell in with such a crowd and who were authentic deadheads.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really got into the Dead. And of course, I think as most people know, the Grateful Dead is like part of the package is the psychedelics, usually.
Mm-hmm.
For most people, there's the Grateful Dead and psychedelics kind of co-evolved together from the very beginning.
Creating
So
each
it was
other.
just a matter of time before that experiment would happen. And that really opened the doors for me. That really was a big game changer. I really, my mind was able to leap really outside the box and see there's a whole other world of reality, not a lifestyle, but also a whole different way of perceiving the world and being that felt more real to me than anything before them. So around the same time, I started exploring the psychedelic realm and the almost pseudo-spiritual practice, you might say, of being a deadhead, totally devoted to following this band around the country, going
Did you
on
tour? Did you
I went on
actually?
tour.
You're a tour head?
For a few years. I mean, in the end, it was over 200 dead shows.
Have you ever eaten a
Often
veggie
whole
burrito or grilled
tours.
cheese?
What's that?
Did you ever eat a veggie burrito or a grilled cheese?
Yeah, sometimes we'd make these things and sell them in the parking lots, right?
Yeah.
And made silk screen and tie-dyed shirts, and would be able to support a whole 2 or 3 week tour down the East Coast and back by selling crafts and camping in parking lots and playing music and so it was some people, of course, it wasn't a spiritual practice for maybe most people who would go to these concerts, but for small groups, they really made it into that.
What year would you say you started touring?
This was like 86, 87, or 87, 88, in those years. 86 to 89.
Were you touring before he got sick and had the coma and stuff? Jerry Garcia?
Yeah, but it was like during that time. I think that was around 88. I can't remember the year. I remember during that time he got sick, was in a coma, and that was tragic for the deadheads, but he picked it back up again. So it was the years when the Grateful Dead were becoming very popular and playing bigger and bigger stadiums, and it was starting to lose some of its kind of family feeling. They still allowed this whole kind of crafts fair to open up in the parking lots, but by the end of my time, they were starting to crack down on it. It got too big. Deadheads would take over whole cities, and too many drugs. It was the Reagan years, the war on drugs. So things were kind of changed by the end of my deadhead years. But also,
so I'm curious, did you during when you were on psychedelics and seeing these shows, I mean, did you ever have, a lot of people report almost like a telepathic or psychic communication with Jerry Garcia? Did you ever have those type of experiences?
Well, I don't know with the person Jerry himself, but with the band as a whole. I mean, because the music came out of kind of communication. The early acid tests in the early 60s was when the band was learning to be an experimental musical force. So they were off, and then they got really good. They got really talented at it. So they were trying to create, I think, this kind of communication, and they would feel it. And you read the interviews with Jerry and the band, they would feel it from the audience. So as a whole, I would say, maybe, I don't know if telepathic's the word, but like a real communion with the band and with the other people. That was always a big part of it. You get thousands of people, maybe half or majority of them are in this like highly altered, very open mind space. And then you put this highly improvisational music that no one knows where it's going, and you turn up the volume, and then your body is moving to this music, and it was inconceivable. I felt at the time a wonderful spiritual communion, and really communing with total strangers on the dance floor, and then never talking to them, but meeting their eyes and kind of knowing that this is it, isn't it? And then several days later, you'd be dancing next to the same person in a state like 200 miles away. So that kind of like very loose knit spiritual community.
I remember,
and a lot of the deadheads had meditation practices too, which is I was getting into at the same time.
I remember I was at one show and just completely enraptured, and it was just really flowing from me, and there was some sort of crescendo of energy and music, and I went like, oh God, just kind of overwhelming. And I opened my eyes, and this guy who was dancing right next to me, like, looked me right in the eye and says, exactly. And it was a real intimate moment with that guy. I remember it was
yeah, it felt very safe too. You felt like you could be with these strangers, kind of wild and out of control, but that it was a kind of loving container, a kind of embrace, that it was celebrating life. And of course, on the edges of it, when things got bigger and bigger, there would sometimes be violence in the parking lots and things like this. But this core of like loving communion was very palpable, and not like nothing I'd ever experienced.
Yeah, it was incredible. So a little bit about the kind of the psychedelic and show experiences, like from this perspective of kind of where you are now, looking back, would you say any of those experiences were on the level of awakening or liberation, or do you think it was more like kind of various levels of jhana type experiences, like like how would you looking at it from a Buddhist path perspective, where would you place those psychedelic mystical experiences kind of within that path? Like what, or do you think
it's a big question?
Yeah.
And of course, there's widely divergent opinions about this, but also I think there's widely divergent psychedelic experiences. Everybody has a unique experience with, I think, some similarity and some differences. And partly for me, that kind of question was influenced by my Zen practice that I was getting into pretty much the same time. These sort of deadhead psychedelic thing was being discovered at the same time as Zen practice for the first time, and starting to read more about Zen and practice meditation with teachers. So the language of Buddhism, particularly Zen, for me, it really mapped onto these experiences. The experiences were like, I don't know how to even talk about this. And then I would, read the ancient Zen teachings and be like, wow, these guys are capturing something about that experience that I haven't seen expressed in any other religious tradition or in any other way at all. So for me, there was a lot of overlap. Now, if we start getting to classifying exactly what kind of experience these things are, I think they can vary. To me, it seems that the most important, experience, if that's not even exactly the right word, realization or breakthrough in all of Buddhism, including Zen, is breaking through into the direct verification of no separate self. And all Buddhist traditions would agree with that. And we could say in Zen they speak of it more as verification of Buddha nature. But in a way, that's another way of saying no separate self. And we could nuance these definitions endlessly, but that's the key liberating insight, because the separate self, from the beginning teachings of the Buddha, was always taught to be the root of all discontent and all greed, hate, and delusion. So it's a key liberating insight, and for the personality, it can change the whole way we relate to the world. So I think that insight into no separate self it wasn't in every psychedelic trip necessarily, but in many, that was part of it. That was one aspect of it. Along with a lot of other stuff. It's very different, of course, from Zen meditation, because the meditation is so stable and focused and usually silent, and so the verification can be very clear and kind of unadulterated. Whereas in the psychedelic realm, there's so much else going on at the same time. It's chaotic and out of control. And yet, at the core of it, there can be flashes or more sustained, really direct verification of no separate self. I think that element is woven through, for many people. Many people would say the same thing. But of course, the context is so different from Zen meditation that if you describe the two experiences, it's almost like they have nothing in common. They're so different.
Right.
And yet this one element that I would say is the key element can be there in both.
What you mentioned you were reading books that were kind of mapping to the psychedelic mystical experience. What do you remember what any of those books were, or texts?
Well, in the university there, I think the first year I took a class like Intro to Eastern Religions. And so it had a Buddhist section. And I don't remember the texts there. So, I think we had some Vipassana, kind of like the Satipatthana Sutta, I think we read there, which didn't strike me as deeply as the Zen text did. But then it might have been the second year of college, because I really enjoyed the Eastern Religions class. This is worth exploring more. There was a professor there named Hal Roth, who amazingly is still a professor there. This is like 30 years ago. He's still teaching there. And he at that time and was a long-term student of Sasaki Roshi. Oh, so he was a professor of, he also taught Taoism and Buddhism, in particular Zen and East Asian Buddhism, and also was a practitioner into many sashins with Sasaki Roshi and Rinzai Zen. So that was sort of his undercover thing. I mean, people knew about that, but I took it was like Chan and Zen class with him. And in that class, I do remember reading like the Heart Sutra, the Platforms, the Platform Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, Chinul's record, also Sasaki Roshi's teachings, also record of Baijan, some pretty like
some deep stuff.
Deeper kind of texts, and that was and Dogen. We had, I think, Moon in a Dewdrop was maybe one of the texts. And
What
Zen My
did
Beginner's Mind.
do you think that class or that teacher influenced, like, nudged you towards Zen as opposed to maybe a different path at all? Or
Yes, for sure. Yeah, he was very enthusiastic, and we had the class, and then also he would have a optional Zazen group. I
oh,
think
okay,
maybe
great.
like once a week. I don't know if it was at his house or in the classroom, but I remember he'd put on a robe, and we'd have zafus, and he'd ring the bells, and it was a little bit like this sort of like secret side of his professor. And when people got really into it, he would send them to Zine with Sasaki Roshi. I never did that, but I remember other senior classmates, they would come back from Sesshin and be like, whoa, I was like, I could barely handle that.
Yeah, and back then I think Sasaki sessions were really intense, like 50-minute Zazen periods and 3 hours of sleep, that type of thing.
Yeah. And also at the same first or second year of college there was a little Zazen group from some teachers from the Providence Zen Center, which is Sungsan and Korean Zen. And that was that's where he started, was Providence, Rhode Island. And so they had their Zen center there. There was, I think, a little monastery. It became that. And so a couple laymen from the monastery would come to Brown once a week and borrow a classroom, and they'd do a little reading from Huang Bo, I remember, which I loved, and then we would just sit some, and then we just casually talk, and they'd answer some questions.
This
so
was weekly or what?
What's that?
Did you say how often that group was?
I think once a week. And it was only like 5 people would come. There was a little poster somewhere that I heard about it, and a very small group. And one thing I remember was that I was hooked from the beginning. I even remember like the first Zazen period and coming out of that period and everything being already just like clear and bright walking home. And like, of course, this is just the time I was into all these different medicinal mind utterance, and this is good. Zazen, this is the best. I feel really clear, and a slightly different perspective just after a period of Zazen. So I remember different people would come for like a few weeks in a row and kind of checking it out, and then you'd never see them again. But I just kept going. I think from the very beginning, I just went every week.
It just felt right.
The one person who kept going.
It just felt right.
So there was, it just felt right. And it was simple, weekly thing. And then also, I don't know how often Professor Roth did these Zazen groups, but I would go to those. And then through these 2 guys from the Providence Zen Center, then I started going to the Zen Center. They would have half-day sittings on Saturdays, I think, maybe every week. And I remember it was like 10 to 12 or something or maybe 9 to 12 on Saturday or Sunday mornings. And I remember so maybe a friend was going and said, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "I don't know if I could get up by 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. That's too much." But eventually,
you did go eventually.
I did go a few times, and brought some other people there, and realized that there is this whole, there's people doing this more and more seriously, right? Living in this community. And so I had no idea that all that was possible.
So were you able to finish college, or did you just get swept away into the Zen tour?
Yeah, somehow I finished, but one thing is, I think a funny piece of the story is that I always passed all my classes except one. In the 4 years of college, the one class that I failed was the Zen class.
Did you just not do the essays or something?
That's what happened. Yeah, there was some big essay at the end, and it was supposed to be this kind of technical, kind of academic essay on Chinul or something. And I remember I was totally into all the reading and the study, and it was transforming me. But I felt like it was such an experiential thing for me that I didn't want to do this academic essay. I felt that that would taint my view of practice. And so I think I turned in like a blank piece of paper just to see what would happen. And of course failed.
That's great. So you're on Dead Tour, and I know at some point not too long later you were at San Francisco Zen Center. What was the transition there?
Yeah, so even when on Dead Tour, those last years as I was getting more and more into Zazen, you go and some of the venues you could just car camp for 3 days in the parking lot or in a field with thousands of other campers playing music all night and everything. But I was getting so into Zazen, like during the day, I would always go off and look for a quiet place to do Zazen. If it was a rural area, go off to the trees or something, right? Couldn't hear the parking lot music and sit. It became a little absurd. Like I really got to do Zazen before the show, And so I could see it was becoming more and more important for me. And I somehow I did get through college, even though sometimes we take a week or so off skipping classes to go on Dead Tour.
Did you ever
manage to get through?
Did you ever make it out to Bay Area shows like the Greek or the Frost or any of those, or was it mostly East Coast?
Yeah, never did a West Coast tour, but I would go to like New Year's Eve, Oakland, and yeah, the Frost. I saw Jerry Garcia band at the Frost. It was great. And
did you visit San Francisco Zen Center when you were out for those at all, or did you know about it?
No, somehow. How did I find out San Francisco Zen Center? Some college friend had been there from the East Coast. And I also remember somebody, I think a different person, in somebody's dorm room, there was a copy of the Wind Bell, the San Francisco Zen Center, like kind of newsletter or journal, quarterly publication. It was just sitting there, and I was into Zen. So I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm like, San Francisco Zen Center. And so that was the first time I heard that there was a Zen Center in San Francisco, and I didn't follow up, but I remembered that there was. And then my brother was going to school at the University of California in Santa Cruz, and I loved California already just from the times going out there. I guess I did drive across the country several times and see shows in the Bay Area too. And so I graduated in the winter because I'd taken a semester off. So it's all, snow and cold in Rhode Island. And I thought, and now I'm graduated. What am I going to do? Go to California, the sunshine, the promised land. And why? Partly it really was to look for a Zen community. I didn't know that there were Zen communities on the East Coast, and this was before the internet, so it was a little hard to find out about any of this.
But Zen Mountain Center, that would have been going at that time. You just didn't know about it, right?
I don't know when Mount Tremper. I don't know when that started. But Rochester Zen Center would have been going, and I didn't know the difference between Soto and Rinzai or anything like that. Maybe I heard of it, but partly it was my brother was in California. It was winter, and I knew of San Francisco Zen Center and somebody who had been there, and I think that I'd heard of this way they do things, which was kind of unusual then, and is still, as I understand it, still kind of unusual at San Francisco Zen Center, maybe because it's been there so long and it's so big. Was able to you could just come without any money or anything and just do like work practice. I think most other places were and still are, you do a lot of work practice and you pay big bucks too. They're trying to keep the places going. But I had no money or anything. So that was a big piece for me. I was like, I don't have any job, I don't have any money. and even the kind of the sort of principle behind it is like, I want to go and work and give my life to some place. Can't I just offer my body and mind? And so I went out there. Also, I was really into farming. I had learned organic farming in the college years and thought that that's maybe what I would do with my life is live out in the country and start an organic farm, grow vegetables. And so I was really into Zen and farming. That.
But only there was a place like that.
Yeah, only there was a place.
So you go straight to Green Gulch then, it sounds like maybe?
I did hear about Green Gulch and thought that's a perfect thing. It's an organic farm and a Zen community, semi-monastic type of place. And I remember I went out there. Oh, another piece of the story is that I was torn between, should I go try out a monastery, a Zen monastery, and really see what that's like, or should I go right into the farming thing? And around this time, this last year of college, my first love of my life, a relationship for at least a few years, ended in its painful breakup, and my heart was totally broken. I was devastated. So much suffering. I'd never had a breakup before. In my, like, I was 22 or 23. It was like devastating. I was like in hell. And I'd done enough Zazen and enough psychedelics to know this is just my mind. It's not about the outer conditions, really. My mind is torturing itself. I'm like insane. And I got to take care of this mind. I really felt like that. And it was so much suffering that that was the tipping point. Do I go try the farming thing, or do I go to a Zen center? Like, I need to do the Zen thing first. Go at least for a few months and realize enlightenment. Then I can go on to the farm thing. at least become sane, because this is like too painful. So that relationship breakup was a great gift. That really that was really the catalyst that flipped my intention over towards exploring Zen in a serious way.
So did you go straight to Green Gulch, or did you go to the city center first?
Well, I took the Greyhound bus across the country, which was awful, and had to get out in Las Vegas and change buses at 3 a.m. and there was some chain smoking drunk next to me who convinced me to come into the casinos and stuff. And we're like, I don't think I'm ever gonna take the Greyhound across the country. But on the way, I think it was on the way, I called Green Gulch and said, can I just come and live there? I'll offer my whole life and services. And well, it's, I don't know, it's $10 or $20 a day or something for the first few months. I'm like, I can't afford that. And they said, well, then you could go to Tassajara, because Tassajara did have that in summer. You could come with nothing and just jump right in and start working and practicing. So I said, okay, I'll go to Tassajara. And they said, it's not open yet because they're in their on-go training period until the spring. This was the winter. So I had 3 months. So I started looking in books, because there's no internet, looking in glossaries of books for Zen centers. I think there was some Ram Dass book that listed a whole bunch of Dharma centers. And I found City of 10,000 Buddhas
up in Ukiah.
Northern Ukiah, Northern California. It's Chinese Chan, and it's a real traditional monastery, huge, hundreds of almost all Asian American monks and nuns from Taiwan or China, mostly speak Chinese, and a few Americans, and I was just calling everywhere, every Buddhist place, and saying, I don't have any money, but can I just come and work and practice with you? That was the only place that said, yeah, you can. Very kind. I didn't know anything. What's the difference between Japanese and Chinese? But it's Chan Zen, and so and they said we're in the middle of our annual 3-week session, the Chan intensive. But they were very open, it's such a traditional place. They're like, but, there's 10 days left, but you can just come right now in the middle. People could come and go. And you can do a little work to help us out. So I think the next day I went, and I had no idea what I was in for. This
and they were particularly intense back then, I think.
They were intense. Master Wa was still
3
alive.
hours of sleep, and you had to sit up while doing it, or something like that.
Yeah. I had never done I never even done a 1-day sitting. But I just I like the idea. Let's do a lot of zazen. Let's do more than one period and see what that's like. That was my total beginner's mind. And Master Hua was still there, but it was the end of his life, so he was not so healthy. I remember he came into the Chan Hall, and during his recorded lectures, they play a recorded lecture, I think once a day, and a few times he would come and just listen. So I never got to talk with him or anything.
Was this the big room with all the Buddhas on the wall, and then the giant Kuan Yin in the front with all the...
Yes, 10,000 Buddhas on the walls.
Yeah, that place was intense.
It's like 3D wallpaper of Buddhas, right? Yeah. And their schedule, it was you wake up at 3. There were, I think it was hour-long periods with 20-minute walking, and they had Chinese style. It's like there's it was like slow walking on the inner lane. It's like highway lanes, like just around the center of the room. You could get almost like keening, and the outer lane was like running full speed. And you could switch lanes, whatever speed you want for 20 minutes, and then another hour sitting, 20 minutes walking through the whole day. I guess there was a Dharma talk, at least some days. There was only one meal a day at lunch. And then the schedule went till midnight, the official schedule. So there was, only 3 hours maximum sleep. And then the senior monastics would just be sleeping in the hall in Zazen for those 3 hours. So I was blown away. I'd never seen anything like this. And it was good that I had this beginner's mind. If I had known what it was like, maybe I wouldn't have gone.
So did you have long hair or dreadlocks or anything at this
point? Yeah,
long
hair, long beard, dreadlock.
Did they give you a robe, or were you just kind of sitting in your clothes?
No, there were a lot of lay people there too. And both Asian and European Americans, and hundreds of people. It was the only time when they really did like intensive Chan sitting in a year. Was these 3 weeks in January. So it's cold too. They didn't heat the hall. It was everything. You could see your breath. It was all the rooms were freezing, and I think I did it for a couple of days, and then I talked to one of the monks and said, I really don't mind like helping do some work if you need it. And at some point they were like, okay, you could take this period and during the day and do some painting or something, which was a great relief. And but it was, and of course my legs were like on fire. I'd never done sitting like this. But so great. And it was like went really deep. I was like, wow. I thought that like one period of Zazen was a cool thing. This is like something else.
Do you think you had some early experience of samadhi there, or was it just kind of survival?
Yeah, I think it's samadhi and what we call makyo in Zen. Some things like I still remember this vision because I didn't know about any of it, that this stuff would happen. I was like, is this being a Buddha or something? But looking back, it's just this like hallucination of, must have been my eyes closed, like I was this giant room, like the inside of an oil tanker or something, this huge metal room, and this drip was coming down from like the sky into this puddle in the bottom
echoing.
And echoing and drifting down, and it's like, this is my empty mind with like dripping thoughts in it, but it was just some vision, but very vivid. So that lasted 10 days. And then when it ended, there was, they do almost no zazen in their daily schedule outside of this retreat. I think they do a lot of chanting and ritual and bowing, like an hour of bowing, beautiful melodic Chinese chanting, for hours.
Yeah, I love that.
And maybe like an optional zazen period in the morning or something. And so that was all beautiful, but totally foreign to me. I mean, I've gone back there to practice since and find it just wonderful. But at the time, I'm like, this is like being in a weird Chinese ritual that I know nothing. It was all in Chinese. And I want to do zazen. That's what's really alive for me. And I did hardly any of it. So if they did do a lot of it, maybe I would have stayed forever. I don't know. But I need to find some place that has zazen. And still waiting for Tassajara. So I lived at Mount Madonna Center, which is Bahari Das's yoga community. That had also just kind of optional meditation, but I learned yoga there, which was wonderful. I hadn't ever done that before. And that was kind of waiting for Tassajara to open in the spring. And then it did. And I went, and I remember that, and I felt like I've come home. This is like my culture. And a lot of sitting in the summer, not that much, but then I heard about these training periods, and you get to stay and do them if you stay for the summer. And but still, I didn't know how long I was going to stay. I had this farming agenda, and I remember like halfway through the first summer, the director had some discussion with me, and they said, like, if you commit to stay for the 5 months of the summer, we can give you like a little stipend, and you can earn these ongoing training periods in the winter. And I remember thinking, like, 5 months? You want me to commit to stay somewhere for 5 months? And it was really like a turmoil for me. I mean, it took me weeks to decide. But then I stayed for like almost 19 years.
So did you have any interaction with teachers at that point, or because different teachers would come down and lead the programs and stuff, right?
Yeah, I meet various teachers. So the abbots at the time were my teacher, Tenshin Roshi, Reb Anderson, and Sojin Roshi, Mel Weitzman.
Was this in the late 80s?
This was, the late 80s. I think I came in spring of 1990, actually.
Okay.
And they were the co-abbots.
The best dead tour.
I went to a couple of dead shows from Tassajara in the first year, maybe, and took some Zen people with me, and but it was fizzling out by then.
Yeah.
It's hard to do this from Tassajara. But before I went to Tassajara, we were asked to spend a week at the San Francisco City Center and get some Zazen instruction and learn the ropes a little bit. And so Tenshin Roshi, who lived at Green Gulch, was giving a talk at the City Center when I was there. So I think it was the first Zen talk that I heard, happened to be him. And I remember it was a class or something, and I was just sitting in. It was all new to me, but they did say, this is the abbot of the Zen Center, so you should come. And I remember him saying that somebody asked, like, why do we have to do all these forms and rituals and do things this particular way? And like, is this really helping people? And Tenshin Roshi said to the person, maybe you're right. Maybe we should just burn down the Zen Center and go out into the street and just help people in any possible way. And at the time, I was very impressed, because I thought, wow, the abbot of Zen Center is suggesting that maybe they burn down the Zen Center. I just thought that was very cool at the time. And so I felt a connection to him. And then, I met many teachers the first summer at Tassajara. He came down, as he did every summer when he was abbot, and gave talks and offered dokusan. So I had first dokusan with him that summer. And he was kind of intimidating to me. He was
very intense,
powerful, energetic person. and I don't know if I can really go meet with him, but it kind of just like, it dissolved my fear when I met with him, because he's really very warm-hearted and kind. And so I felt some connection, mysterious karmic connection with him from the very beginning. And because of that,
when you were there, were you aware at all of the turmoil that there had been kind of a half decade earlier regarding Richard Baker? Was that part of your reality? Did you?
No, nobody ever talked about that. I mean, I found out about that later, but yeah, it wasn't that long before when I look back now. But so I think the place was building up again, but it was thriving in those years. I think it was kind of a heyday. I feel like with Tenshin Roshi and Sojin Roshi, they would alternate leading every practice period, and it would be like full house, 60, 65 people in the zendo. Sometimes you squeeze people on the floor in the corners and stuff. Those practice periods were amazing, and now looking back, those teachers were in 50s. They were younger, and Tenshin Roshi was a powerhouse, and really like kind of some radical. He would push the envelope a little bit, in various ways.
There's this. You're familiar with Daishu and West up in Humboldt County?
Yes.
Yeah. So I went up there to visit a couple times, and the abbot at the time, he's since passed away, and we were talking about different forms of Zen. He's like, "Oh, well, we met Tenshin Roshi. He came up here once. He burns hot like us, Yeah. Like, it's not all sleepy and Soto. There's people like him,
Yeah. He would I remember one time he said, when I would design sashins, I would design them to be like the very edge of what I thought I could do. And then of course everybody else had to do it too. So we would have some longer, 10, maybe we had a 2-week ones, at least 10-day sessions.
So you mentioned you were, you mentioned you were kind of on the fence of what to stand. Do you think meeting him pushed you over the edge to sticking around?
I think that was part of it. And yeah, and getting to do, people would talk about these training periods. Oh, it's very different from the summer. And it is very different. Tassajara becomes a completely different place in the summer, and then the traditional Ango training periods. But because I wanted to practice with him, I went to Green Gulch Farm, where he was leading the fall practice period. For people who don't know, San Francisco Zen Center is the San Francisco City Center. Green Gulch Farm, Green Dragon Temple is the farm community up in Marin, and then Tassajara in the mountain wilderness inland of Big Sur. So 3 communities are connected as one institution of San Francisco Zen Center. So that people were rotating between these temples regularly. You could, while doing the Tassajara summer, you could earn the training period at Green Gulch. So I did that to go practice with him. And that was the first Zen, Japanese style Zen sesshin Rohatsu that year. And then I was really hooked after Rohatsu at the end of the training period. And doing Dokusan with him through that period.
How often would you have Dokusan?
There was a lot of people, so not that often. You'd be sign up on the list basically, and then it might be once a month. But then once you're ordained as a priest, then it's automatically once a week. So for many years, it was weekly Dokusan, which is not quite like Rinzai Zen, where it's really regular, but it's longer. You can really get into a discussion. And so Dokusan was always very transformative for me. And Tenshin Roshi is a great yogi practitioner, but he's also a great scholar, and that really I think I had that inclination, and he really encouraged that. And learning Buddha Dharma was been really transformative for me over the decades. In addition to doing a lot of stuff.
How quickly, and what was the variables that kind of switch you from like, I'm going to try this out and stay here for a while to this is my life, this is what I'm going to do? You know, like how quickly did that
Yeah.
transition happen?
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't exactly overnight, but I think doing that first practice period at Green Gulch and the first session, I think that was a real clincher of like, oh, there's something here. Like, I got to keep doing it. And then the first Tassajara practice period, which is more intensive than the Green Gulch one, very traditional Japanese style 90-day ongo with a lot of zazen, 3 sessions, and a lot of ceremonies, and being in sealed in the mountains and nobody comes and goes. That was I think that sealed it even more, especially doing that with Tenshin Roshi. And
did you go from fall and Green Gulch to spring and Tassajara? Was that the
yeah. So basically, when I got to Tassajara, just first arriving, checking it out that first spring of 1990, I basically, between Tassajara and Green Gulch, I never left for maybe 4 or 5 years straight from there. I never looked back. I think as it kept going, I felt like this farming thing, then I got to work on the farm at Green Gulch, right? Maybe the first fall when I went to ask, and I work on the farm, I really have this passion for this. And they said, okay. And that kind of disillusioned me about being a farmer, to be honest. It was such hard work. I mean, you had to do the whole zazen schedule, and you're leaning over the fields the whole day, and people were exhausted and falling asleep and zazen, and I'm like, it was a kind of reality check.
Maybe
also, I was still interested in it as an idea, being kind of self-sufficient, growing food and all, but the Zen thing just kind of took priority more and more. It started overwhelming all my other interests.
It could have been a different era, but I kind of remember during my visits to Green Gulch, when I'd stay as a guest student or whatever, it seemed like the people who were, maybe it was the farm apprenticeship program, but it seemed like they did less zazen, because they were out there early sometimes or something, or does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I think in the years when I was there, they were supposed to. It might have become more realistic, like kind of modified schedule. Yeah. And then they can do after the summer of the farm apprenticeship, then they can do the training periods in the fall, and a lot of them stay for that.
Did you? How quickly did you do Jukai after kind of entering the system?
Yeah, pretty quickly. I saw that people were doing this, and I was sort of like, I was so gung ho about everything. I just I asked pretty early on to do that, and then let's see. I guess that was after that winter training period at Tassajara. Then the next summer, then I went to Green Gulch to do Jukai, received the precepts, and then I took a so I shouldn't say it was 5 years straight too, because I took it's going to say semester. I took a training period off. I took 2 months off and went to traveling in India with a friend from college, India, Nepal, and partly it was like I could see I was getting sucked into this Zen world, and I thought this is getting serious, and before I commit to it fully, I should check out Tibetan Buddhism, which I'd heard about some. And so I didn't make that big an effort. I also wanted to just travel around India, but I went to all the pilgrimage sites and so on, and I did meet some Tibetan teachers. But I realized when I did, it's too late. I'm already too hooked into the Zen style. And of course, I love Tibetan Buddhism and practice with teachers now. Many years after that, I kind of get more back into it, but I really felt Zen. This is my style.
So it was the it was the samadhi experiences and the wisdom and no self that kind of drove you into Zen. What was your experience? The Jukai, you're thinking more in terms of ethics and so forth. Was that a smooth transition for you, or was that enlightening, or had you already was that intriguing to you, or were you already thinking about that anyway? Or
I think that was like kind of my nature was kind of natural sort of discipline, even back at Mount Madonna.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was kind of in this hippie mode, but even as a deadhead, I remember times between, we had like a day off between two shows, and talking to my friends, let's go to the woods and do a day of zazen.
Mm-hmm.
What? You can if you want. I remember they dropped me off with a tent in the woods somewhere. We'll pick you up in a couple of days. And so I already had this kind of inclination to kind of be more serious about practice even then. And I think Jukai was a natural thing. Oh, I want to live my life in accord with this bodhisattva conduct. And it was pretty natural to me. And my psychedelic days of all that was like, once I was living in these communities, then you can't really do that at all anymore. And that was not a problem. I felt like, well, that was a wonderful time. It got me here really, and I'm happy to let it go now. And I always thought in the back of my mind, like I never felt like, as I got more into the monastic mode, I never felt like, oh, it's drugs were just a delusion. Mm-hmm. I always felt like they were teachers for me, and that I really honored them. And I never knew if I'd pick it up again. And in fact, after 20 years of monastic Zen practice, I did pick it up again, and it was a new experience. Mm-hmm. So that's another part of the later story. Mm-hmm. But at that time, the first, after I came back from India, Tassajara, it was a couple years in. There was one sesshin. I think I'd done about 7 sessions or something, and I was just getting more and more into it. And one session at the end of the Tassajara Ongo, I just thought, I gotta throw everything into this. Mm-hmm. And I mean, sesshin's are already pretty intense, but I'm like, we'd have the oryoki meals in the zendo, and then I would walk out the door around the zendo and then just go right back in and sit down again. So, because I would be like, even a half hour or an hour break is too distracting. I just gonna like stay on my seat like the whole time, and then sit into the night too. Mm-hmm. We often do night sitting, but I would sit for hours into the night. This one session, it was getting near the end of the practice period, and I just felt like I gotta throw myself into it completely, because then we're gonna go into summer mode, and it's the schedule is gonna get relaxed. And so I don't know, the 6th day of sesshin, maybe something shifted and opened up, and I felt like I had to find Tenshin Roshi right away, and it was like on a break after a meal or something, and I couldn't wait for Dokusan. And I saw him on the path walking to the bathhouse. Can I talk to you? And just, he was super relaxed and just walking along the path. He's like, well, just walk with me. Sure, you can. What do you want to share? I said, well, there's, in the midst of all this total delusion and pain, what if there's some like freedom and joy in the middle of all that? And tell me about it, son. Maybe you just really maybe you just got really concentrated, and it's just a deep samadhi, and it's not really liberation. So we talked back and forth a little bit, and then he asked him, well, can anything touch it? And then this doubt arose. What? Can anything touch it? What kind of question is that? And so he said, well, why don't you check that out? Sit with that for a while. So then there's still another day or so of sesshin. So I kind of took that in as a really kind of like a koan. I didn't think of it that way at the time, but really looking, can anything touch this realm, this freedom? And then that overturned the doubt about that. And so that was I would say first breakthrough in the Zen realm. And I was so happy wrote a poem and gave it to Roshi, and this was so long ago now. This is 25 years ago, or 30 years ago. So it's hard to remember the details, but remember the effect being that the sesshin ended, the ango ended, but my feeling was like, now I really got to get serious about practice. Rather than feeling like, oh, this is great, I can just like whatever. Now it was like the opposite of like, now I know it's possible. I really got to do this.
So, did you get ordained soon afterwards?
The end of that ango, I think it was that on the end of just after that sesshin, I think it was. I hadn't really thought about ordination because most of the priests were much older than me. They were 10 years older, different generation. I thought it was something, I felt like a kid. I was 25 years old, I think. And there were no other priests in their 20s at that time. Now there's a few more, but there weren't. But so I didn't really think about it. But Tenshin Roshi, just before he left to return to Green Gods, he said, "Have you ever thought about being ordained as a priest?" And I said, "No, I never thought about that, but I guess I'm going to now."
Well, you hadn't even considered it, huh? Because it just seemed like something grown up still.
No, maybe someday. I mean, I was into it, but I just thought that's something I'll do when I'm older.
Yeah.
But because he planted that seed, of course, I started thinking about it, and then it was still a while of process of a few years actually of like considering, because I treated it seriously. Maybe that's partly why I hadn't thought about it, is I felt like I heard all the stories about the ancestors. I'm like, well, I got to be a total renunciate monk if I'm going to do that. That's how I think of it. So, and I don't know if I can do that. So I really had to think about that for a while. And I remember one conversation with Tenshin Roshi is he had a pretty high standard about it, in addition to his practical things. Like you have to live with him at Green Gold for 5 years, and you can't even go to Tassajara because you have to be closely with him. But in addition to
Tassajara, you would go to Tassajara, right?
Yes, yeah, you just follow him wherever he goes. And he said, he would say, well, priests should have no worldly ambitions, and that you should be willing to give up everything. He would say things like that. That would like kind of intimidate me. Like, I don't know if I'm willing to give up everything. I don't even know what that means. But just the idea of it, I took that as a kind of pointer for me for months and months. Am I willing to give up everything? I actually do want to be ordained, but I don't know if I'm willing to give up everything. It isn't more of not literally, it's more internally willing to just surrender to whatever how this path takes me. And at some point, it was again one of these times where I was really working with it, and it was at Tassajara a year or so later. I felt I got to this point where I'm willing to give up everything. And it was a day off, and I got to tell Roshi right away. And I went to his cabin and knocked on the door, and he was like in day off mode. And I just like prostrated to the floor and said like, okay, I'm ready. I'm willing to give up everything. And he was like kind of dumbfounded and like, oh, okay. And then I'm like, so what should I do now? I was just totally open, like whatever he says to do, I'm ready to do it. He said, well, you can just, there's the door, you can just walk over to it and go. So
I'm eating cereal here.
So then it was a couple years afterwards, I was 28, I guess, when I actually got ordained, which I was, first is permission, you talk to the other abbots and the teachers, and permission to sew okesa. I was so happy when I got to start sewing. And then there's another maybe year of sewing robes, and so happy to get ordained. And I felt like at that point, I felt like this is my life now. I don't see anything else. But sometimes happens when it's like 100% on board, there was this woman in the practice period right after the ordination, and we kind of fell in love, as happens sometimes with Tassajara. And this isn't supposed to happen. I've been like a, celibate monastic, really committed to. I was starting to study Vinaya and trying to follow all these precepts, and for 4 years at that point. And happily, it wasn't a struggle at all. I was never thinking about relationships, but something happened with this person, and Tenshin Roshi was like quite open, even though he just ordained me. He's like, well, if you want to do that, you should leave and go take care of the relationship with this person. And then we don't have a celibate tradition. So if you want to come back as an established couple, you can do it, but don't try to do that here in the monastery. He's, had some kind of guidelines about that kind of thing. So it was such a hard decision for me. I really lost a lot of sleep over that. And in the end, I felt like, I'm going to make this decision based on renunciation and of whether to go off with this woman, leave the monastery, put down the robes for a little while, or continue and drop that. And because I'm committed to renunciation. And I really struggled for days and days trying to decide about this. And in the end, people maybe thought this was crazy, but for me at that time, it felt like the deeper renunciation was to actually like leave with this woman. I really in my heart felt that. Yeah, we did that. Because I felt like the alternative was this thing that I got this, and now I'm a priest, I wanted to do for so long. I got it. I'm so happy. This is my home for years now. I love these practice periods, and I know what it's going to look like for the next years and years. And it's all kind of like stable and set. Whereas to leave with this person, be like, I don't know what's going to happen. That's a total unknown. And everything I know, I'm going to have to leave behind. And everything I love, I'm going to have to leave behind. So that's how it went, for better or worse. And,
so where did you go?
So we just went traveling around, living in a car for a while, and doing daily zazen and doing one-day sittings on our own. But after, and then came back after part of a year, maybe a year, half a year or so, back to Gringos. It was an established relationship stable enough to come back, but it was, my heart was actually still split about it. I felt like this traditional monastic life was such a deep calling for me. This poor woman, she was happy to be together, but I was so on the fence about it just because of this calling. I mean, I loved her, but and I had just started this priest path too. So in the end, it was too hard. She had to leave. She couldn't deal with my ambivalence any longer.
It did. Sorry, I'm just turning off my ringer. So did you sense any disappointment on Tenshin Roshi's part, or he'd probably seen this pattern happen multiple times?
A few times he'd seen. It was such a mess. I mean, at the time, I felt so. It's such turmoil, and but I was really so devoted to Tenshin Roshi. If he had said like, I just ordain you, you can't do it, you have to drop that and stay here, I probably would have just followed him. But in fact, I think he could really see my process and said, you have to decide this on yourself. Yeah, you have to leave if you want to do this. So he knew that I'd have to give something up, and he's like, I just want you to do what you want to do and really look deeply. So I really respect his openness for that. And I remember asking, well, but isn't that hard for you that you just put all this energy into doing this thing for me? It's like, are you like supremely disappointed? And he said, no, I'm like a little embarrassed, but not really disappointed. So that was very helpful for me. He's been strict with me over the years, but he's been really kind too.
But you were, but I mean, that was like 6 months to a year you were gone. It was just a little interlude.
Yeah, and he said, I don't want you to make any commitment to come back. I think you should see, you might not ever come back, and if you don't, you've had a great 4 or 5 years here doing Zen practice, and you really like it'll be with you for the rest of your life. If you never come back, you have my blessing. So we really left it open ended. But from the moment I left, I knew I wanted to come back.
So and then you went back into the system. So I kind of, you know, from a Zen career perspective, would the next major chapter be Susho or the head student?
Yeah, actually before that, let's see, after that relationship ended, and then okay, you can take up the priest training again now. It was such a relief. My kind of divided mind.
Had you not been? You had been ordained, or
I had been ordained, but he's like, don't present yourself as a priest if in the world when you're still in training and you're not around me. Don't wear the robes. So I was still a priest, but incognito. And then when I came back, he's like, okay, take it up again. And it was I felt all this surge of energy just because my mind wasn't divided anymore. And then I practiced the Green Gulch for a while. And at some point I said, I think earlier in years before, I had said like, maybe I really need to go to Japan or something, just more intensely. And whenever he felt like there was some, grasping mind in me, he'd say, no, you could stay here. But this time I remember saying, I don't know, I wonder what I should do next. What do you think? I could stay at Green Gulch. I could go back to Tassajara for training periods. I could go to Japan and practice there. And then he picked up on it this time and said, oh, yeah, maybe you could go to Japan. So that's what happened. And I thought this is an opportunity. I was 32 maybe. And I'd heard of various places, but a good friend of mine from Tassajara, who goes by Satya now, a priest ordained by Koben Chino Roshi, Shimpu-san. He was a friend in the early days of Tassajara. We would like push each other to sit up all night and stuff. He was a gung-ho practitioner, so we're still good friends. But he'd been training at Bukokuji for some years. And also he traveled around China and practiced in Korea and did a lot of training periods. But he was really enthusiastic about Bukokuji because I was wondering places to go. And
this is Tongan Roshi or?
Tongan Harada Roshi, a disciple of Daiun Sogaku Harada Roshi, Dharma brother of Tongan Roshi's Dharma brother, Yasutani Roshi. And so he was maybe in his 60s or 70s at that point. Still had a lot of energy, and so my friend Satya was like, "There's places to practice, but Tongan Roshi here is the real thing. You should come." And it's nothing special about this monastery, but he's the real deal. I recommend you come here because he checked out quite a few places. So I did, and that was. That was like 97, 98. And about a year, a little less, maybe 10 months at Bukokuji was really transformative time for me. The memories of that time still stand stronger sometimes, I feel, than all these. I think I did 14 angos at Tassajara. Maybe because there were so many of them, they all kind of blend into this one.
How long did you stay there?
But Bukokuji was 10 months. So most of a yearly cycle. And very traditional. Bukokuji is not a Senmon Soto, which is like a licensing temple. So it has a special kind of atmosphere because of that, because the Japanese priests don't go to do their Ango time and get their priest license so they can go back to the family temple. There's no reason to be there except just to practice and realize. So it has great spirit. and very international. Tongan Roshi was open to Westerners from the beginning. And it's a little small, kind of funky place, but because they're not a licensing temple, they don't have to do a lot of really elaborate ceremonies. So they have morning and evening service, monthly events, but not a lot of funerals, not a lot of learning elaborate stuff, more focus on a lot of zazen and a lot of dokusan.
Was it daily dokusan there?
What's that?
How often was dokusan there?
There was no, it's this Harada. I guess you can't call it Harada Yasutani, and you can call it Harada lineage. But the same style as Yasutani, which is kind of Rinzai style practice with Soto liturgy, kind of a blend. So Dokusan with Rinzai style meant like during Sesshin 2 or 3 times a day, and outside of Sesshin, kind of random, like maybe a few times a week, not every day, all the time.
Did you continue with Shikantaza there, or did you do Mu, or what was your practice like there?
Yeah, so there they have kind of the standard setup in that lineage. It looks like of like this three choices: Zui Soku, following breath, Muji, Mukoan, or Shikantaza, and you kind of work it out with Tongan Roshi when you get there. And so beginners, he has do Zui Soku, breath following for a while. Everybody does, maybe not for that long, but for till they get some pretty stable zazen, and then almost everybody is doing Muji. And it kind of unusual, as I understand it, like in the Rinzai world, I think this would be unusual that the people doing Muji just do it for their whole life. There was apparently nobody had ever passed through Muji and gone on to other koans at Bukokuji. He just saw it as like, that's just your practice. You do
a friend of mine passed Mu there. And then he's like, all right, go back, more Mu.
Okay, so maybe that's the way to say it too. You could pass it, but then there's nothing more.
Yeah, it's always deeper to go. Yeah. How would you compare and contrast the practice there with what you experienced at Tassajara during the Angos?
Yeah, in some ways it was much more strict. Just like it's really emphasizing silence. Even if people were chatting over tea and Roshi-sama came out, you're like, oh, immediately have to be quiet. And like, it's right in a town, but you weren't really ever supposed to go into town. People did sometimes. If you had to.
You can't read, is that right?
What's that?
You're not allowed to read, is that correct?
Yeah, you're not allowed to read. That was nothing, smaller print than this. You can like read a street sign or something. And so yeah, that was different. Tassajara, a lot of classes and really learning a lot of Buddha Dharma, which I love that aspect. But this was refreshing too. Like the Tongan Roshi would say, if you made it this far to come here, you know enough Buddha Dharma. You listen to his talks, which of course were not at all academic kind of Buddhism. But very simple, straightforward practice, very simple lifestyle. The food was all donated, so whatever came. We did takohatsu, that alms round once a week, or spend the whole day walking into different villages as a practice. And then it goes 8 sesshin a year, 8-week-long sesshin. And so in some ways it was much more strict. And things like on the bath day, which is every 5 days, there's like an order of bathing, and you starting with the abbot, and then you have to go in your assigned order, and you have to put on all your robes to go take a bath. At some point I thought, this is so absurd, like in my casual clothes in my room over here, and then I have to put on these robes just to go take them off in the bath. One time I just went like in a kimono, I think, and Tongan Roshi Kami was like, you don't go to the bath just wearing a kimono. Put on your rakusu and all. That's like Japanese style, right? And but in other ways, it was less strict, I would say, than Tassajara Ando has a really tight schedule with a lot of zazen and very short breaks in between events. Whereas Bukokuji, there were some longer, hour, maybe sometimes 2 hour, free time when you were kind of encouraged to go to the Zendo, any free time. But, a lot of people did, but a lot of people didn't necessarily. So it had an open, spacious kind of feeling as well as being kind of a tight container.
How about him as a teacher? What was Dokusan with him like? Was he, was it like being in a furnace, or was it more relaxed? Or, what was his teaching style that Dokusan?
Well, part of it was he really didn't know English, and most of the Westerners didn't know Japanese. I know a little bit. He knew a little bit of English. So that was, and then on the 4 and 9 days, the kind of bath days, if you wanted to have a longer discussion about your plans to stay there or any other matters, you could have translated Dokusan. But the Sesshin ones were just whatever you can do with this language barrier. But that was the style anyway in Dokusan. So you just present your practice and when in our first meeting, I said I've been working with Shikantaza for some years, and I feel good and confident about that and continuing. And so he said, "Good, can you do that?" To be honest, I think of the maybe 20 monks there, I think I was the only one doing Shikantaza. Almost everybody doing Muji, or the new people doing breath. So, but I think he kind of liked that somebody was exploring this other practice. So you just present your practice, Muji ni sanji torimasu, or Shikantaza ni sanji torimasu. Shikantaza is my practice. And then sometimes, he just size me up and look at me, and sometimes and that would be that. Or sometimes he'd give a little instruction like about Shikantaza in various, very simple ways. Shikantaza, only point here. It is tanden. That was like his Shikantaza instructions. Or he'd say, he had these great English phrases that he'd use, but even though they were over and over, it's really powerful, like thinking unnecessary, worry unnecessary, only just this. And the way his energy around this was, I really felt like Dokusan was wonderful to just get this encouragement. Sometimes we're sitting in the freezing Dokusan room with these clouds of misty breath, and say, shh. And he would repeat back, shh. Calm. Shikantaza, and we just both burst out laughing.
So what, in a lot of ways, was that like an energetic meeting?
Definitely an energetic meeting. So not at all technical instructions. So a lot of emphasis on sitting in the dantian, the tanden, the hara, and only this one doing. One of his favorite trademark sayings was ichitante, ichitante, ichitante.
What does that mean?
Tante is like usually with like a muji, it's like raising the expression, and just this one raising of the koan, but it could apply to its breath, it's just sitting. Just use it, everything you're doing. His translation into English is only doing, only one doing. So his energy was definitely a big part of it, but his teisho in sesshin, and on the bath days, he would give a more longer sort of informal teisho with kind of tea ceremony at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And those were translated, and people would often be crying during the English translation of the teachers because they were really moving too.
I assume you've read, is it Jirio? Is that how you say his name?
Jiryu, yeah, a good friend of mine.
Yeah, so his in his book, he reported a little bit of hazing, I don't know if hazing is the right word, but very harsh treatment by the head monk. Did you experience any of that type of interaction?
No, I mean, very intense. Yeah, the kind of one head monk when I was there was this really big, like 6'6" or something, Japanese monk. Hold on just a second, let me get this shit. And he was a little intimidating. He would, like, in the middle of winter and at the wake up bell, he'd like take off his shirt and take like this like hard bristle brush and just like brush his whole body to kind of like wake up, get the blood flowing. But he was one who was a little intimidating, but big guy, and didn't speak any English.
Mhm.
And but he had this warm heart. So when you kind of got to know him, you'd see his warm heart. And if you really were having a hard time or something, he could be gentle. But I do remember, like, this would be a difference from Tassajara. I think one time in that year, I got sick, like a bad cold, like flu or something. It's really out of it and just felt so. All I wanted to do was stay in bed, and this relentless schedule, including the day off and everything, just keeps going and going. And it might have been the so-called day off, the bath day, or someday I just felt really sick in it, and I went to ask. I think it was him, that head monk, Dogo-san. What about just taking one evening period off? I feel really sick, and he really gave me a hard time about it.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, kind of, even if you're sick, you just keep the schedule going,
Mm-hmm.
and so there wasn't much sleep, and the food was a little bit meager.
Mm-hmm.
I end up eating lots of rice.
Mm-hmm.
There's not that much else. And so, but at the same time, this wonderful feeling, and this feeling of like really tasting traditional practice.
Mm-hmm.
Takohatsu was great because we'd sometimes take a train or a bus to a different town, and so we have like this yearly cycle of like all the kind of little villages in the county, so you don't kind of overtax any one village by asking too much. So I was really exploring like rural Japan in these takohatsu trips. They were a real highlight. They were hard because you're walking in these straw sandals all day, but really wonderful to get to see that part of the traditional culture. And sometimes in modern shopping malls, and you see like the modern people, some of them like to give to the monks, but I think they see it's like, no, we don't do that anymore. But it's the old grandmas in the country houses can't wait till the monks come by and bring out some rice or something.
Great.
Sashins were wonderful. They kind of up everything a notch for sashimi. A lot of people would come in from around Japan for sashins, fill up, overflow the zendo into another hall, and use the kyosaku a lot. And very rigorous, wonderful practice.
So when you were, that's awesome. When you were back in the States, so when you got to like kind of the shusho stage, was that intimidating for you, or what was that transition like?
Yeah, so that was shortly after I came back from Japan, and went back to Tassajara, and I was asked to be shuso, the head student for the Ango, and it's a wonderful rite of passage. Really, I think it's really, especially in a bigger Ango like that, where there's 60 people, so you ring the wake up bell every morning, and then get to sit next to the teacher, and start giving some talks for the first time in the Zendo, and have tea with everybody in the practice period. So it's this, for a shy person like me, you're kind of like pulled out of the corner and put it front and center, and it's great practice. And then of course we do it with the Shuso Hosen Shiki Dharma inquiry ceremony. We do at the end of the Ango, so it's kind of the graduation, and people come down from from Green Gulch and all the past Shusos of San Francisco Zen Center, some of the old timers. Everybody's invited to come down, and the senior teachers get to ask questions and test you. And so it's a great experience.
It's not scripted like it is in Japan. So does
No, yeah. Our style is spontaneous questions. Everybody in the training period and the visitors, you bring up some case at the beginning so people can ask about that case, but not necessarily. So yeah, intimidating. We walk into that room, and of course there's so much formal ceremony leading up to it, and yet a great opportunity.
So when Tenshin Roshi, when he first broached Dharma Transmission with you, were you like, whoa, I don't know, or did that just seem like a natural evolution? Or
well, let's see, yeah, he, compared to Japan, it's a long process. I think so is 15 years after priest ordination was Dharma Transmission. Is that right? 94 to 2012, almost 20 years. So it's just this like a long steeping in practicing together with a teacher like that, and then there's a long process leading up to. So after Shuso, which wasn't that many years after ordination, but then there's this long process, and for me it was some more years at Tassajara and Green Gulch, back and forth, and then feeling like this Tassajara cycle of summer and winter. I loved the winter Ango periods, but the summer was sometimes get tedious for me. Just lots of new people come in, not much zazen, a lot of work, a lot of goofing off. It's you could make it your own thing, and people did. The longer term people would make their own practice there, but I felt like, what if we could keep this kind of Ango style practice going all the time? We could just go deeper and deeper. And so me and some friends talked about this. We talked about it for years, and finally we're like, we got to do this. And so then it happened. This place, No Abode Hermitage, was based on that idea from Tassajara people who wanted to do it more full time in a tiny hermitage style, more intensive, simple practice, and live.
So people who live that, did you kind of formally leave the San Francisco system and live there, or were you kind of still, do you still have a job there and a role, or were you just like,
no, it was leaving it behind. We talked with Zen Center about doing something, but financially and all, it doesn't make sense. So we just have to do it on our own. And at some point, there were a lot of people interested, and then at some point we said, well, there's going to be no stipend, no health insurance, and we're going to, because we don't have any income, we're going to do takuhatsu for food. Almost everybody dropped out wanting to do it. Like, okay, forget it. I'd rather stay at Tassajara. But we got this place, a house, a couple miles from Green Gulch, with the idea that Tenshin Roshi could come just train some senior students there. He ended up not coming. He just felt like, well, you go there, just your practice is going great. And we would go to Green Gulch for Dokusan. But it was a wonderful, 3 years, 20 something sessions. We would have 3 so-called Ango a year with breaks in between, and just a few people. And we would do traditional takuhatsu, alms collecting with the Japanese get-up of the bamboo hat and the shawl sandals at Mill Valley, and we were able to sustain ourselves
So you
for a
would get
few
enough
years like
food
this.
to actually, you would get enough food.
Yeah, green goats leftovers, they would, instead of composting the leftovers, they'd pass them on to us. That helped. We would gather miners' lettuce when the rains would come, things like this. It was a wonderful, wonderful few years of intensive,
So you were there 3
small.
years, huh?
Yeah, I think it was 3 years. By the end, it was just me there. So, and Tenshin Roshi was going to Tassajara, and he said, "Come and help out in the Green Gulch kitchen just while I'm at Tassajara, because it'll allow some of my newer priests to come with me, and that would be a nice gift." And I said, "Okay, but just one practice period, right? And then I go back to no abode." And he said, "Sure, you can go back." But in fact, then I got hooked into Green Gulch, and that was the end of that no abode experiment. It's still there, and he leads a zazen kai there every month. And nobody's lived there for a long time. It was a wonderful era for sure. And when I went back to Green Gulch at this point, that's when we started kind of studying for Dharma transmission in a group of senior students and studying commentaries on transmission documents. I really got into like the kind of he's teacher's kind of a scholarly type, so I really look into like details and study a lot of Dogen fascicles, line by line, in this kind of seminar setting with his senior Dharma heirs and those preparing. And that group continues. I still nowadays I still attend that on Zoom every week.
Oh, awesome.
Nice to be able to meet with the senior practitioners and discuss the.
So you've been able to continue your So is Tenshin Roshi part of that, or is it just the students?
Yes, yeah. He leads that group every week. That's
so you're
just
able to maintain your relationship.
Post-pandemic thing. Otherwise, without pandemic, he's not an online kind of person, but he warmed up to it when it was the only way. And now there's people around the country who would never be able to come except on Zoom.
That's great. So so after transmission, did you stick around Green Gulch for a while, or did you go to Santa Cruz pretty much right away?
Actually, let's see. It was I was at Green Gulch, and then I was asked to be Tonto, like the head of practice at Tassajara for a year. So the abbots are really leading the practice periods, but the Tonto keeps it going through the summer and kind of helps out the abbots in the winter, offering practice discussion and these kinds of things, helping train the egos and like that. So then after a year that, then I went to Santa Cruz. I didn't Dharma transmission yet. So I think that was part of the thing. With Tenshin Roshi, transmission, he seems to see it as like, it's partly a functional thing. If somebody has a group, and it would be good for them to be able to give the precepts and lead a group and ordain people, then you should have this piece. But if you don't really have, if you're just practicing on your own, then you don't really need to. Sometimes he sees it like that. So it was I think after a year in Santa Cruz, then I went up to Green Gulch, and it's a very traditional Dharma transmission ceremony. It's a 3-week ceremony, lots of daily rituals, and then the last week is all day long combination of making documents and ceremonies. So it's a wonderful thing, and I think Tenshin Roshi, I think, is a real gift because he's really trying to keep a lot of traditional practices alive and kind of not cut the corners, but really offer everything, maybe more than actually most people would do it in Japan, in Sotoshu. Very kind of, don't leave any pieces missing, which some people feel like it's too much. It's too detailed, but it's like we can really, like, it's this kind of samadhi to do ceremonies really completely like this. And so I really appreciate that about him.
So overall, like how do I articulate this question? So, Zen is obviously, Zazen and the teacher-student relationship is kind of central. But anyone who spends any time at a Zen center, there is a lot of ceremony. what is your relationship to ceremony? Is it something you kind of do because it's your job? Does it really resonate with you? I mean, what role does it play in your practice, and what role do you think
Yeah.
it plays in Zen overall?
Yeah, when I first came, of course, I was surprised to see that. I thought it was just about sitting and what is all this stuff.
Mhm,
But pretty quickly I warmed up to it, and now I love ceremony. So yeah, kind of. So it's a body practice. It's a samadhi practice, chanting and the way move and harmonize with a group.
mhm,
Doing the ceremony alone is wonderful too, which these days I do a lot. But especially in a bigger group, it's like dance.
mhm,
Maybe it's an extension of my deadhead days. Very choreographed,
mhm.
not free form
Yeah.
dance. And also like a heart expression. I really feel like it's an expression of devotion in
Mhm,
all Buddhist traditions, and it's anything can be an expression of devotion. But I think the ceremonial ritual is like designed to be able to kind of like express your heart in these activities,
mhm.
heart of devotion.
One thing I could say about it is, there's a couple like Dogen texts and excerpts of sutras and stuff that we chant and set up, and just reading them, you read them, but the only time they have ever like really hit me is during service. Even like a line will be said, and there's something about like doing it in service and communally. I'll be just like, oh, whoa, like do you ever get that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Lines from the chants of leap out, and
Hmm.
also other little pieces of ritual like oh, that's what that's about. I didn't think there was any meaning, but by doing it over and over, you kind of feel like, oh, it has a kind of, there's a meaning in it that we
Hmm.
feel by doing it.
Hmm.
Yeah, so many things. It's hard to. It's not such a rational thing, like the ritual,
Hmm.
but it's beautiful.
Hmm.
And
So
and you know,
so you're also doing a Tibetan. I never pronounced it right. Dzogchen,
Dzogchen.
Dzogchen. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you're doing that practice. Is that at what point in your Zen practice did you start that?
Uh, Maybe 2003. I think it was when I was at No Abode. That's when I
Hmm.
started exploring it. Yeah.
Hmm.
We had a library. There was one of the practitioners there had lived in India for a long time and really got into Tibetan practice. And so
Hmm.
she had this whole library of Tibetan, especially Dzogchen, he was
Hmm.
into. So wow, this is just the way that they put things really struck me. It was more like it felt more straightforward. Um, the instruction, the meditation instruction particulars sometimes really like would click something more explicitly
Hmm.
than Zen offers. I felt like.
Yeah, I mean, the little I've
Um,
seen, it almost seems like like a technical manual as opposed to poetry that maybe is Zen is.
yeah, less poetic, sometimes a little poetic,
Yeah.
but pointing out instruction, which is like
Hmm.
direct pointing to the nature of mind. It's like
Hmm.
a teacher and student based on this strong connection.
Hmm.
So that is like kind of like classical Zen.
Hmm.
It's very similar
Hmm.
to that. And Tsoknyi Rinpoche is just a wonderful teacher who's, a lot of Dzogchen teachers and other Tibetan teachers, they're into a lot of Vajrayana tantric
Hmm.
stuff also.
Hmm.
Tsoknyi Rinpoche has a little of that, but I was always really into just, refining the meditation practice. And that's his
Yeah.
love and specialty. He's
How
really,
did you meet him? Was he in the Bay Area, or like what
yeah,
was the connection there?
he came to California somewhere when I was at No Abode, and I heard about him and did one retreat and
Hmm.
immediately thought, oh, this teacher is really clear. And then just a few years after that, I think I didn't keep up with him. And then when I was back in Santa Cruz and could travel more than living in the monasteries, then I started going more regularly to retreats with him here in Crestone and in Kathmandu. And
And your wife is very into that practice too, right?
yeah. His brother Tsoknyi Rinpoche is also
Hmm.
a good teacher of mine,
Hmm.
and she's really that's her root teacher.
So
So
did you introduce it into the relationship, or did she? Like who
she
kind of
was
did?
getting interested into Tibetan Buddhism. All right, she's a Zen priest, but
Hmm.
she started getting more drawn to the clarification of the teachings in that tradition and the meditation. And she really likes the Vajrayana elements too. And so kind of together maybe she didn't maybe know Dzogchen so much. So kind of together we got into it, and she spent some time living over there. So I lived in Nepal with her for a time and got to spend time with the teachers in their home.
You guys were heading over there to live, but then the COVID hit, is that right?
Yeah. 2 years ago now, we were planning to go there. It's been fine. Just recently, they're just opening up for people to come and stay there now. And these days, so we're talking, well, maybe we go there for the last year of this time. Another thing that we didn't really touch on, I have to go pretty soon, but starting in Santa Cruz, I started doing these month-long or sometimes 3-month-long solo retreats every year for maybe past 7 years. And that has been just a really transformative for my practice. More transformative, I would say, than the traditional 90-day Ango. I shouldn't say more. I mean, they're both equally wonderful, but I think deeper concentration for me in the solo retreat, undistracting.
Yeah.
Everybody else.
Would you be interested in doing a part 2 of this where we can dive into more of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure.
Great. Yeah. So do you want to end here? We're at 2 hours and 2 minutes at this point.
Sure. Yeah. I have another call.
Yeah.
So it's been great sharing the old memories.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay.
Take care.
All right. Thanks again.